Today we are going to continue our discussion the on the categorical syllogisms. Okay, so last time we started discussing the nature of reasoning and the argument, and just to refresh our memories, let's try to go over the discussion once again. So we've said that there are three mental operations. The first one is simple apprehension. In simple apprehension, we just form the ideas, or we form concepts. And we express these concepts, these ideas, through the terms or words. So every idea, every concept can be expressed through words, different words or terms. In the second operation, the mind forms propositions or enunciations or assertions. So enunciations, assertions, propositions, sentence, that are similar, they are the same, because they express uh, the agreement or disagreement between of concepts or of terms. What do you mean by pronouncing the agreement? For example, if we have an idea of, say, the sun, so we use the term sun to express our concept of the sun. You see here that the words may vary depending on the language that you use. We may have the same idea of the sun, but we're going to use the term sun if we are speaking in English, but we are going to use araw if we are speaking in Tagalog or Filipino. Okay. So you have the concept of sun, and you also have the concept of shining or bright, for example, bright. So if you have the concept of sun and bright, our mind can put them together. Okay. Say the sun is bright. So that is an expression or an assertion of agreement, meaning that the two concepts, sun and bright, they agree. Okay, they are related. We can assert the predicate shine with the subject sun. The sun is shining, or the sun is bright. Okay, so that's the meaning of a sentence. That's the meaning of assertion. Now, of course, we form different sentences. As we speak, as we write, we speak of or we write of different sentences. And some of these sentences or propositions or assertions can be put together, and they can be connected to one another in order for us to arrive or to derive another proposition. Okay? So, for example, when we say the sun is bright, and we can also say that uh, uh, during the day the sun is shining. Okay? We can put together this: the sun is bright, the sun is shining during the day. Okay, and come up with other statements or propositions based on these two propositions. Okay, so for example, again, if a statement or if a letter, let's say A, represents a concept and B represents another concept, we can say A is B, right? We can also connect A with C. We'll say A is C. Now, from A and A is B and A is C, we can connect the two sentences and derive another statement. So if A is B and C is A, then we can also say that C is B. This is now the process of reasoning, the third mental operation, where the mind is able to connect different statements or different sentences or different propositions. So that's reasoning, or we also call it inference. Okay, and we have said that there are two kinds of inference: the mediate and immediate inference. Okay, so immediate inference, we have this: from one proposition, we immediately derive another proposition. The mediate inference is we try to connect two statements by means of a third statement. And the third statement is formed by combining the two terms that are or that is common to both sentences. So for example, you see here in the on my PowerPoint, all commercial models are highly paid personalities. Some commercial models are actresses. So the common term here is the term commercial models. By connecting the two terms, highly paid personalities and actresses, with the third term, meaning this these commercial models, we come up with this statement: some actresses are highly paid personalities. So this is an example of a mediate inference. Okay. Now, the product of inference, of course, we can call it inference. We can call it a discourse. But technically, we call it argument. Okay? The argument. The product of reasoning is argument. Okay? The product of simple apprehension is the concept. The product of judgment is the enunciation. And the product of reasoning is the argument. And we define argument as a discourse that stakes a claim, meaning it claims something. What is the claim? The claim is the conclusion, the proposition that is derived. Okay? So, there are two parts of an argument: the premises and the conclusion. So, the premises, they contain the reasons or the proofs. So, these are the two statements, okay? The two statements from which the conclusion is derived or inferred. Okay? So the conclusion is the claim or claims or hypothesis. So we cannot say that a sentence is already an argument, because an argument must contain two basic components: the premise or premises and the conclusion. If there's only one sentence, only one proposition, it cannot be an argument. Okay? Because an argument will always have at least two propositions, one being the premise and the second being the conclusion or the claim. So it's very important that we are able to identify the premise and the conclusion. Okay? Because that will tell us if the discourse is really an argument. Okay? Now, how do we determine the argument? If something is an argument, consider the intention of the speaker, if he is really arguing or claiming something. Okay? Definitely, when you write your thesis, your intention is to put on or advance an argument, to make a claim. Because that's the very nature of a thesis. Okay? Or a term paper. It should be an argument. If you're not just making a report, okay, or you're not just broadcasting. Even when you are doing a report in the office, that is also an argument. You are also presenting something, and you are backing up, okay, supporting your presentation with evidence, with information, with data. Okay, so the data, the information, what else? The figures, they serve as proofs for your claim. Okay, so the intention is very important. because that tells you whether the speaker is putting up or presenting an argument or not. Then, of course, consider also the context. Okay, so uh, these are the terms that will help us determine if a part of the discourse of the argument is the premise or the conclusion. So here are some premise indicators. So if a sentence or part of the argument is uh, introduced by terms like this, since, inasmuch as, follows from, is implied, because, can be shown for the reason, okay, assuming that, etc., then that means that part of the argument is a premise. So take note, okay? And these are some of the conclusion indicators. Therefore, ergo, then, consequently, thus, hence, so, etc. These are conclusion indicators. So keep this in mind, because one of the most important thing that a critical thinker must be able to do is to identify or determine first if a discourse or if a piece of writing is an argument or not. And if it is an argument, definitely there will be two important parts: the premise, which contains the proofs, the evidence, and the conclusion, which contains the claim or the hypothesis. Okay, and these are the terms that will help you identify these two main parts of the argument. Okay, so there are two kinds of arguments that we have discussed: the deductive argument and the inductive argument. So first, what is the inductive argument? It's an argument whose premises are general or universal statements. Okay, they may be a priori or analytic propositions, and the conclusion is a universal or particular statements that are necessarily true. Okay, so we have given examples of this. Okay, here, all traditional politicians are power brokers. Some local executives are traditional politicians. Then it follows that some local executives are power brokers. So look at the two first statements or propositions: all traditional politicians, etc., some local executives. So these are the two premises, and there are general statements. Okay, of course, the second one is a particular statement, but there is always a general statement or universal statement in the premise. Okay, so that is an example of a deductive argument. Here are some examples that we have shown. Okay, I have shown you last time. And the inductive argument now, the premises are particular or specific statements that are empirical or a posteriori. So the difference between the inductive and the deductive argument is in the type of premise, the type of premises that they employ. Deductive, universal or particular, or universal or general. Inductive, particular or specific. Okay. Deductive, the statements are analytic or a priori. Inductive, the premises are usually empirical, meaning experiential, based on experience, and a posteriori. Okay. And of course, the conclusion is a universal or particular statement, but they are based on probability. So the difference also in conclusion: in deductive argument, the conclusion is necessarily true, while the conclusion of an inductive argument is based on probability. Okay, so here are some examples that I have presented to you last time. Most septuagenarians who have major surgery suffer serious complications. Mr. Patrick is a septuagenarian, etc. Therefore, it is likely that he will. So take note, these are specific statements, like most septuagenarians, most 70 years old. I'm talking of a particular person, Patrick, Mr. Patrick, and the conclusion, take note, likely that he will suffer So it's not a conclusion that is always true. Okay, it's likely that it's meaning it is probable that it will have some serious complications. Okay, here are some other examples of inductive arguments. Okay, so these are the examples that we used last time in discussing the inductive argument. Okay, so take note, especially in the second example, 67%, 87%. We're talking now of figures, okay, specific figures. We're not just saying all or some or few. We're talking of very specific figures. Okay, so that's the nature of the inductive argument. Okay, all right. Uh, Now, let us go now to the syllogism. And this is now the lesson, the first lesson that we are going to take up during this morning. The syllogism. So the syllogism is the basic form of deductive argument in Aristotelian logic. So first, it is a deductive argument. Okay, so let's set aside the inductive argument first. This is a deductive argument. And it is the basic form of deductive argument in Aristotelian logic, because there are many other types of logic. Okay? But one of the first philosophers who developed a logic, meaning a science of logic, is Aristotle. And he offered the syllogism as the basic form of deductive argument. Okay? So, it is a argument. And of course, because it's an argument, it will always have the premise and the conclusion. Okay? Now, there are two elements of the syllogism. But of course, these two elements of the syllogism will also apply not just to the syllogism, but to other arguments. What are these? Matter and form. Okay, so don't forget, matter and form. What do you mean by matter? The matter would be the content or the substance of the argument. Okay? The content or the substance of the argument. It is what the argument is all about. What the argument is talking about. And it is expressed through the ideas or the terms and the judgment or the propositions. So we can see the content, the substance, the meaning of the syllogism based on the terms or the propositions. Okay, because the terms of the propositions, these are sentences. They say something. So what they say would be the content of the argument. The second is the form. Okay, the form is the structure or the pattern of the argument. How the terms and the propositions are connected, are structured, are related, are arranged. That would be the form, the structure. So, this tells us about the logical connection of the terms and of the propositions, how they are connected. Now, when you think of it, all arguments will always have a content, right? Because all arguments will have terms and propositions. So all arguments will have matter. It will have substance. It will have meaning. It will have content. At the same time, it will also have a form. It will also have a pattern. Because for an argument to be an argument, there must be a logical connection of the words, of the propositions, or of the sentences. Because if the words and the sentences do not have any connection at all, meaning no form, then it cannot be called an argument. Okay, because there must be a connection between or among the propositions that contains or that consists the argument. Okay, so let's talk about, I'll give you an example later on, but let's talk about what we mean by logical connection of terms. It means the consistency or the consequence of the argument. Meaning, the terms, the sentences are logically connected. Okay? Logically connected. Now, consistency does not mean truth. Why is that? Because we can have an argument whose sentences are logically consistent, but these statements are not necessarily true. They may be false. Okay, they may be false. Let me give you an example before I go to the of types of the syllogism. Let's go back to this example I gave you a while ago. Here, since the mother has very powerful hands, and since Martha has very weak hands, it must follow that Martha cannot be the murderer. All of these sentences are connected, right? It's connected because Mother, powerful hands, and Martha has very weak hands. Okay, that's a very consistent argument. Okay, because there is a logical flow from one part of the statement, from one statement to the other statement, and then to the other statement. Okay, since the mother has very powerful hands, so meaning the mother has very powerful hands, and Martha has very weak hands. Therefore, Martha could not be the murderer. So it's a logically consistent argument. But we can also consider that the murderer has very powerful hands. That could be false. Okay? That could be false. And Martha has very weak hands. That can also be false. Okay? So, even if your premises are false, for as long as you have a logically consistent argument, you can arrive at a valid conclusion. Okay? Can arrive at a valid conclusion because the basis of validity is that all the parts of the arguments, meaning the premises and the conclusion, are consistent with one another. And consistency does not always mean truth, because we can be consistent with lies. Okay? We can be consistent with lies. In fact, two people arguing differently, they may be opposed, but they can argue consistently. For example, in a court case, the prosecution will say the accused is guilty. That's the claim of the prosecution. And he will present premises, evidences that support the claim that the accused is guilty. Okay? So the prosecution presents a valid argument, okay, to support his conclusion that the accused is guilty. He will present evidences, proofs, testimonies to support the claim that the accused is guilty. The defense side, on the other hand, will also present a counter argument. He will say the accused is not guilty. So it's a position that is contradictory to the position of the prosecution. And he will also argue his case consistently, logically. He will also present evidence, proofs, witnesses to support his claim that the accused is not guilty. So both are arguing consistently, but they're talking or they're telling us two different things. The prosecution is saying the accused is guilty. and the defense is saying the accused is not guilty. Definitely, the accused cannot be guilty and not guilty at the same time. There must be only one side who is telling the truth. Obviously, the other one of them is not telling the truth. Only one must be telling the truth. But both are arguing consistently. So it's possible for an argument to be consistent or valid even if the propositions are false. But of course, a good argument is an argument that is based on true propositions and follows a logically consistent flow. Okay, so it's a strong argument. It's both consistent and true. Okay, both consistent and true. But as I've said, it is possible to have valid conclusion, okay, even from false premises. And you can also have true propositions and arrive at an invalid conclusion. That is possible. Okay? So for example, say in the case of weather forecasting, you read the data, okay? Data given by the equipments, and then you follow certain method of interpreting all this data. So you followed all the procedures, you followed the data, and then you make the forecast. You make a forecast about the weather, for example. But your forecast doesn't happen, meaning you made a false forecast. But you base your forecast on true data. So you have followed everything logically through data, but you arrive at a false conclusion. Now, it's also possible that even if your data are not reliable, even if your bases are simply superstitions, they may not be true. But it's possible that you chance upon a true conclusion. Like in the case of, for example, you bet in the lotto. So you arrive at the conclusion that I am going to bet on these numbers. That's your conclusion. I'm going to bet on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's the basis for saying that the result will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Well, because number 1 is my favorite number. Number 2 is the favorite number of my friend. Number 3 is the number of pets I have. Number 4 is the number of my siblings. Number 5, the number, the address of my friend. Number 6 would be whatever number. So that's the basis of your conclusion that the right combination in Lotto will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your evidence, your data, your basis are not scientific. But lo and behold, the following morning, the result is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you chance upon, by sheer luck, chance upon the right combination, and you arrive at a true conclusion. But it's a conclusion that is not validly derived from the given premises. Okay, so it's also possible that you can have an invalid argument and then chance upon the right conclusion. That's what people do when they take the exam and they don't know the answer. They just make all their inferences, and then I'm going to answer letter A because without any sound basis, you answered A, and When the result of the exam came, you are right. There are also those who have followed all the procedures in computing, in answering the question, and is very convinced that the answer is D. Followed all the procedure, but his answer is wrong. Okay? So there's a difference between consistency or validity and truth. Okay? Now, let's go to the two types of syllogism. These are the categorical syllogism and the hypothetical syllogism. So, two things that you have to remember as a critical thinkers. One, the nature of the argument, that there are always two parts of the argument, premises and conclusion. Premises, you have the data there, the figure there, your evidence, your proof, and your conclusion, the claim, the hypothesis, etc. And of course, there are two things involved here: logical validity or consistency and truth. And the two are not always the same. But of course, if you want to have good argument, you must have true proposition and valid inference, consistent inference. Okay? Valid inference meaning there's a logical connection in your argument. Okay, now let's go to the hypothetical syllogism. So remember that a syllogism is the basic type of argument or deductive argument, and there are always three propositions. Okay? The first two propositions are this one: all inventors are scientists. Some inventors are well-known worldwide. So these are the two premises, and you have the conclusion. Therefore, some people who are well-known worldwide are scientists. A categorical syllogism contains categorical propositions. So these are all categorical propositions. Okay? Now, the second type is the hypothetical syllogism. So it will be composed of hypothetical proposition. So here, the main proposition, the first proposition is, if the suspect is found guilty, he will serve time in prison. This is a conditional proposition. And then the second statement and the last statement, this is the conclusion. So the last is the conclusion. This is a categorical proposition. So the difference between categorical and hypothetical is that in a categorical syllogism, all the propositions are categorical here, while in a hypothetical syllogism, one of the propositions, and usually it's the first proposition, the first premise, it's a hypothetical proposition. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. Now let's focus now on the categorical syllogism. So basically, there are three propositions. The first two propositions are the premises. The first premise is called major. The second premise is minor. And then, of course, the conclusion. Okay, so here is an example. All Christians believe in Christ. All Catholics are Christians. Ergo, therefore, all Catholics believe in Christ. So the first is the major premise. The second, all Catholics are Christians, the minor premise. And the third, all Catholics believe in Christ, is the conclusion. Okay? There are also three terms in the syllogism: the major term, and the minor term, and the middle term. So here, the major term, so here, this is the example. I hope you're still following. All bankers are businessmen. Mr. Cruz is a banker. Ergo, Mr. Cruz is a businessman. Okay? So, the major term is the businessman. The minor term is Mr. Cruz. And the middle term, bankers. Okay? this is quite complicated, so I would really encourage you to ask question if you don't understand the discussion. All right, so I'm flashing now. I'm using now my the whiteboard here. Okay. Okay, so I will use this example. All bankers are businessmen. All bankers are businessmen. Okay. And Mr. Cruz is a banker. And ergo, so I will use these three dots. Can you see this, class? The three dots means ergo or therefore. Okay. So Mr. Cruz is a businessman. Okay. So this is the major premise. Okay. Major. This is the minor. I hope you can still see that on the screen. And then this is the conclusion. So we say that there are three terms: the major term, the minor term, and the middle term. So the major term, and we use P, no? The major term. Major term. The major term is the predicate, this one, of the conclusion. Take note, it is the predicate of the conclusion. So we use capital P here, capital P. So this is P, that's the major term. And it is also found in the major premise, this one. Businessman, right? Businessman. Businessman. So this is P. That is the major term. The minor term, minor, is S. That means this is the subject of the conclusion. And it is also found in the minor premise. This one. So I'll repeat. The major term is the predicate of the conclusion, always the predicate of the conclusion. And it is also found in the major premise. Okay? It can either be the predicate of the premise or the subject of the premise or of the proposition. The minor term is always the subject of the conclusion. And it is found in the minor premise, either on the subject side or on the predicate side. Subject, predicate. Okay, follow. Right? Then, the third term is the middle term. That is M. And the middle term is the common term in the premises. Banker, banker. Okay? So this is M and this is M. So, I repeat, the major term is always the predicate of the conclusion. And it is also found in the major premise here. Either on the predicate side or on the subject side. In this example, it's on the predicate side. The minor term is always the subject of the conclusion, always the subject. That's the S. That's why it's S, subject. No? And it is also found in the minor premise. And in the minor premise, it could be on the subject side or on the predicate side. In this example, it's on the subject side. And the third is the middle term, and that is the common term in the two premises. This case, in this example, it's the banker. Now let's go to how to make the schema. How to make schema means pattern of the syllogism. Okay, it's the pattern of the syllogism. So you have to follow this illustration so that you will not be confused later on. Let's complete now this schema first here. So let me just show. So let's copy this example. All Christians, I hope, I don't know if you can see the entire board. All Christians believe in Christ. Okay, and all Catholics are Christians, and therefore all Catholics believe in Christ. Okay. Now, which term is the major term? Which is the major term?
Christ.
Christ.
Christ only?
Believe in Christ.
Yes, correct. That's believe in Christ. Okay, believe in Christ. So this one is the P. Okay, this one is the P. Sorry, and this is also here, right? Which is the minor term?
All Catholics.
Okay, Catholics only. Okay, Catholics only. That's the term. So Catholic is the S, right? And Catholic is also here. So what is the middle term?
Christians.
Christians. All right. So this would be the M. Now this is how to draw the schema. You have already identified the terms, the major, the minor, and the middle term. So the next step is to draw the pattern. The schema is the pattern, okay? That will give you the form of the syllogism. So it's like this. Okay. So you draw the line. Hope you can. You see? Okay. Okay. You can see. S P. Subject predicate. So P is Christ. Believe in Christ. And believe in Christ in the major premise is on the predicate side. So you write P here. You're just substituting. And S is Catholic. And in the minor premise, it's on the subject side. So you write S here. I hope everybody is really paying attention, okay? You may just be logged in here, but if you are not watching, if you are not following, this will be a disaster. So M is the middle term, that's Christian. So you substitute M here. M. Now, to complete the schema, you have to put in the quality and the quantity of the proposition. And this will be your guide. All is universal, right? So that means this is a universal subject. Believe in Christ is it's an affirmative proposition. Since this is an affirmative proposition, the predicate is particular. Now, all Catholics are Christians. So all Catholic, universal, are affirmative. Since that is an affirmative proposition, this is particular. Therefore, all Catholics believe in Christ, universal, affirmative, particular. This is now the schema of this syllogism. That is now the pattern of this syllogism. They follow?
Yes, po.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. All right. Now, let's move to some more. Let's see. So that's the schema now. Okay, you can see that on the boards the same as I have illustrated here. That is the schema. Now let's take this first preposition. This first syllogism here. Let's take the first one. Let's do the here every hard line. So class, even if you have not read or seen yet the syllogism, you can start by writing, by drawing this. This is the line demarcation between premise or premises and conclusion. So it's always SP. Doesn't change. Subject predicate. So here, every hardline Protestant does not accept the Pope as head of the church. Many Christians accept the Pope as head of the church. Therefore, many Christians are not hardline Protestants. Which is the what is the major term here? Anyone?
Hard line Protestants.
Hardline Protestants. And in the major premise, where do you find that? In the subject or predicate side?
Subject.
Subject.
Subject. So you write P here. Now, what is the minor term?
Minor. Subject of the conclusion.
Christians.
Christian.
Christians, yes, subject of the conclusion. So it's in the subject side. So, yeah. And what is the middle term?
Pope as the head of the church.
Yeah, accept the Pope.
Accept the Pope.
That's the whole predicate. Accept the
Accept the
Pope
Pope
as
as the
head
head
of the
of the
church.
church.
So M here. So you see, if you write it this way, even if the syllogism is very long, it's reduced to only the symbols. Okay. So now you put the quality and quantity. All hardline Protestants, so this is universal, does not accept the Pope, meaning that is a negative
Negative.
proposition. And since it's a negative proposition, what is the extension of the predicate?
Universal.
Correct, correct, universal. Now, many Christians, P or U?
You po.
Hmm?
P.
Particular.
P, particular, yeah, many, particular. Accept, affirmative. And since that is affirmative, this one is particular. Very good. Now, many Christians, P,
A.
uh, negative, right? Not hardline. No. No. Therefore, this is a universal. So this is the schema of that syllogism. So let's do the second one. Okay, let's do the second one. Again, you write the line as P. Okay, it doesn't change. It's always like that. And then you identify, so good administrators. And where do you find the good administrators in the major premise? Subject or predicate?
Predicate.
Subject. So you write P here. Okay, obviously, this is now the M because you've already identified that that is the P. And the S is effective heads of school. So where should we write S? Subject predicate. Hmm?
Predicate.
In the predicate. So S, that obviously this is now the M, right? So all good, so that's universal. And look after the welfare. That's affirmative. Therefore, affirmative, therefore this one is
Particular.
particular. Then anyone who looks, that's universal. Affirmative. So affirmative, this one is P. And therefore some are good. Therefore, P. Still clear? This clear, class?
Yes, sir.
So this is the second. Can you do this? We'll do this, the first one first, and then the last, yung no political group, you will do it on your own. You answer the two syllogisms. Sige. I will give you 5 minutes to do these two syllogisms. And then you will submit, you will send that to our group chat. Most of you have got it correctly. There are those who did not get one part, just one part, one part. No? The common error is the predicate of the proposition. Remember that if the proposition, whether it's the premise or the conclusion, is negative, the predicate must always be universal. So it must always be you. Okay, it must always be universal. Okay, if the proposition is affirmative, then the predicate should be particular.